I moved into the old Victorian house on Maple Street about a month ago. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of place where everyone minded their own business but offered a polite wave when passing by. The house itself had character. Creaky wooden floors, antique fixtures, and a wraparound porch that groaned under the weight of its own history. One evening, after a long day unpacking the last of my boxes, I settled into my favorite armchair by the large bay window in the living room. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and the streetlights cast elongated shadows along the empty sidewalks. With a cup of tea warming my hands, I gazed absent-mindedly across the street. That's when I noticed him. A man I'd never seen before standing in the front yard of the house directly opposite mine. He was tall and thin, wearing a dark coat that seemed too heavy for the mild weather. His posture was stiff, almost unnatural, as he stared intently at the house next door to his. Curiosity piqued. I watched as he took a few deliberate steps toward his neighbor's property. He paused at the edge of the lawn, glancing around as if to ensure no one was watching. Unsettled, I considered looking away, but something about his behavior held me captive. Suddenly, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small object. It glinted briefly under the streetlight. A key, perhaps? He moved swiftly to the side gate of the neighbor's house and let himself in without hesitation. I sat up straighter, a knot forming in my stomach. It was possible he was a friend or family member, but the stealthy manner in which he entered didn't sit right with me. Debating whether to mind my own business or keep watching, I decided to observe a bit longer. Minutes passed, and there was no sign of movement from either house. The street remained eerily quiet, the only sound the distant hum of traffic. Just as I began to convince myself that nothing was amiss, a faint light flickered in an upstairs window of the neighbor's house. Through the thin curtains, shadows danced. A struggle, perhaps? My heart rate quickened. I reached for my phone, fingers hovering over the keypad. Should I call the police? What would I even tell them? That a man entered a house and there might be... What? I wasn't even sure myself. Before I could make a decision, the front door of the neighbor's house swung open. The man in the dark coat stepped out, his movements calm and unhurried. In his hand, he carried a large duffel bag. He glanced around once more, then walked briskly down the sidewalk, disappearing into the night. I stared at the now closed door of the neighbor's house. No lights, no movement, nothing out of the ordinary except the lingering sense of unease that hung in the air. Compelled by a mix of fear and concern, I decided to keep an eye on the house for any signs of trouble. The next morning, I woke early and peeked out the window. The neighborhood was coming to life. Cars leaving driveways, joggers making their rounds, and kids waiting for the school bus. The house across the street looked normal in the daylight, almost too normal. Unable to shake off the events of the previous night, I decided to introduce myself to the neighbors. It would be a good way to check if everything was all right without arousing suspicion. I baked a batch of cookies, a friendly gesture that also served as an excuse to knock on their door. As I approached the house, I noticed something odd. The front garden was overgrown, weeds choking the flower beds, and the mailbox was stuffed full of letters. It didn't look like anyone had tended to it in weeks. I hesitated but forced myself to continue. Knocking firmly on the door, I waited, listening for any sounds of movement inside. Silence. I knocked again, this time louder. Still nothing. I tried peering through the front window, but the curtains were drawn tightly shut. A sinking feeling settled in my stomach. I turned to leave, nearly bumping into an elderly woman walking her dog on the sidewalk. "Excuse me," I said, regaining my balance. "Do you happen to know who lives here?" She gave me a puzzled look. "That house has been empty for months, dear. The old owner passed away, and it's been on the market ever since." A chill ran down my spine. "Are you sure? I thought I saw someone here last night." She shook her head. "No, it's been vacant. Maybe you saw a realtor showing the place." I forced a smile. "Yes, perhaps that's it. Thank you." As she walked away, I glanced back at the house. Vacant. Then who was the man in the dark coat? And what was he doing inside an empty house? Questions swirled in my mind, each more unsettling than the last. Returning home, I decided to call the local police station to report what I had seen. It might be nothing, but I couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling that something was terribly wrong. An officer took down my statement, assuring me they would look into it. Hours passed, and as dusk approached, I found myself once again by the bay window, scanning the street for any signs of the mysterious man. Just as the last light faded from the sky, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was him, the man in the dark coat. This time, he stood directly in front of my house, his gaze fixed firmly on my window. I froze, heart pounding in my chest. How long had he been standing there? And how did he know? Before I could react, he raised a gloved hand and tipped his hat ever so slightly, a sinister acknowledgement that sent a shiver down my spine. Then, without a word, he turned and vanished into the night. I stepped back from the window, questions racing through my mind. Who was this man? What did he want? And most importantly, what had I gotten myself into? Determined to uncover the truth, I knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. The night stretched on interminably, each creak of the house amplifying my unease. Sleep was elusive. Every time I closed my eyes, the image of the man tipping his hat haunted me. By dawn, I was exhausted but resolute. I needed answers. I decided to visit the local police station in person. Perhaps face to face, they would take my concerns more seriously. The station was a modest brick building, unassuming yet bustling with activity. Inside, an officer directed me to a desk where a middle-aged detective sat sipping coffee. "Detective Harris," he introduced himself, offering a firm handshake. "How can I help you?" I recounted the events of the past 2 nights, careful to include every detail. The man in the dark coat, the vacant house, the duffel bag, and his unsettling appearance outside my window. He listened attentively, jotting down notes. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. "We've had no reports of break-ins or suspicious activity in that area," he said thoughtfully. "But we'll send a patrol car to check it out." "Is that all?" I asked, frustration creeping into my voice. This man entered a house that's supposed to be empty and then appeared outside my home. "I think there's more to it." He gave me a reassuring smile. "I understand your concern. We'll look into it. In the meantime, keep your doors locked and don't hesitate to call if you notice anything unusual." Feeling dismissed yet unwilling to argue, I thanked him and left the station. Outside, the morning sun did little to warm the cold knot in my stomach. Determined to uncover more, I headed to the public library. If the house had a history, perhaps old records or newspapers could shed some light. The library was quiet, dust particles dancing in the streams of sunlight filtering through tall windows. An elderly librarian greeted me. "How can I assist you today?" "I'm researching a property on Maple Street," I explained. "Number 212. Do you have any historical records or articles about it?" She nodded thoughtfully. We keep archives of local records in the back. Follow me. In the dimly lit archive room, I sifted through yellowed newspapers and brittle documents. Hours passed as I delved deeper into the house's past. Just when I was about to give up, an article from 20 years ago caught my eye. "Family vanishes without a trace," the headline read. The article detailed the mysterious disappearance of the Miller family, parents and their young daughter, who lived at 212 Maple Street. No signs of struggle, no evidence of foul play. They were simply gone. Chills prickled my skin. How had I not heard about this? I continued reading, uncovering a series of odd occurrences associated with the house. Subsequent owners reported strange noises, unexplained shadows, and in one case, another disappearance. I sat back, trying to process the information. Was the house cursed, haunted, or was there something more tangible at play? Lost in thought, I nearly jumped when my phone vibrated. It was a text from an unknown number. "Stop digging where you don't belong." My heart pounded. How did someone get my number? And who was sending me this warning? I showed the text to the librarian. "Is there any way to trace this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She looked concerned. "I'm afraid not from here, dear. You should report this to the police." I nodded, though I doubted they'd take me seriously. Gathering my things, I thanked her and left the library. Outside, the sky had darkened, heavy clouds threatening rain. As I walked home, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every shadow seemed menacing, every passerby a potential threat. I quickened my pace, relief washing over me as my house came into view. I locked the door behind me and double-checked the windows. The house felt empty, its silence oppressive. I decided to distract myself by organizing the remaining boxes from my move. While unpacking a box labeled miscellaneous, I came across an old photograph that wasn't mine. It was black and white, depicting a group of people standing in front of what looked like my house, but decades older. In the background stood the man in the dark coat, his eyes unmistakably piercing even in the faded image. I dropped the photo, fear gripping me. How did this get among my belongings? Was this some kind of joke? My mind raced. The previous homeowner. Could they have left this behind? Or was someone trying to send me a message? Determined not to let fear overtake me, I decided to confront the situation head-on. I retrieved the photo and examined it closely. On the back, scrawled in elegant script, was a date, June 12, 1925. That couldn't be possible. The man looked exactly the same, unchanged by nearly a century. A sudden knock at the door jolted me from my thoughts. I wasn't expecting anyone. Peering through the peephole, I saw a young woman with a friendly face, holding a clipboard. Cautiously, I opened the door a crack. "Can I help you?" "Hi, I'm Emma, the neighborhood coordinator," she said brightly. "Just welcoming new residents and sharing information about local events." Relieved, I opened the door wider. "Oh, thank you. I'm still getting settled in." She handed me a pamphlet. "We have a community watch program. Given some of the strange occurrences in the area, it's good to look out for each other." I hesitated. Strange occurrences? Her expression shifted slightly. "Well, there are rumors, old stories about some of the houses. Probably just urban legends, but you know how small towns are." I decided to take a chance. "Actually, I've experienced some odd things myself." She raised an eyebrow. "Really? Like what?" I invited her in and recounted everything. The man, the vacant house, the photograph. She listened intently, her face a mix of curiosity and concern. "You're not the first to mention the man in the dark coat," she said quietly after I finished. "Several residents have reported seeing him over the years, always around that house. Do you know who he is?" She shook her head. "No one does. Some say he's a ghost. Others think he's connected to the disappearances." I showed her the photograph. Her eyes widened. "This is incredible. Where did you get this?" "I found it among my things, but I have no idea how it got there." She studied the image. "We need to show this to someone. A historian or perhaps even the police." "I've tried the police," I sighed. "They don't seem to take me seriously." "Maybe they will if more people come forward," she suggested. "I can gather others who've had similar experiences. Perhaps together we'll be heard." A glimmer of hope stirred within me. "I'd appreciate that." As she stood to leave, she paused. "In the meantime, be careful. And if you see him again, don't engage. Just document everything." "I will," I promised. After she left, the house felt less oppressive. I wasn't alone in this anymore. That night, I settled into bed with a notebook and pen on the nightstand, ready to record any unusual events. Sleep came more easily, my exhaustion finally overtaking my anxiety. Sometime in the early hours, a soft tapping woke me. At first, I thought it was a branch against the window, but the rhythm was too deliberate. I sat up, heart thudding. The tapping continued, more insistent. Gathering my courage, I crept toward the window and pulled back the curtain ever so slightly. There, standing on the sidewalk under the pale glow of a street lamp, was the man in the dark coat. He was looking directly at me, even though I was certain he couldn't see through the small gap. He raised his hand, revealing a familiar object dangling from his fingers. My house keys. A surge of panic washed over me. How did he get my keys? I checked the front door earlier. It was locked. He placed a finger to his lips in a shushing gesture, then turned and walked slowly down the street. I stumbled back from the window, grabbing my phone to call the police. My fingers trembled as I dialed, but before I could hit call, the power went out. The room plunged into darkness, the hum of appliances silenced. Fear tightened its grip. I fumbled for the flashlight app on my phone, the weak light barely piercing the darkness. Remembering Emma's advice, I grabbed the notebook and scribbled down the time and what had happened. A sudden creak echoed from downstairs. Someone was inside the house. I quietly locked my bedroom door and looked for something to defend myself with, settling on a heavy brass candlestick. Footsteps moved methodically through the lower level, each one deliberate and unhurried. I dialed 911, whispering urgently into the phone. "Someone's in my house. Please send help." The operator assured me that officers were on their way. The footsteps reached the base of the stairs, then began ascending one slow step at a time. I backed into the corner of the room, candlestick raised, eyes fixed on the door. The footsteps stopped outside my door. A shadow moved beneath the gap, and the doorknob rattled gently. "Leave me alone," I shouted, my voice betraying my terror. Silence. Then, a familiar voice, a woman's voice, whispered from the hallway. "It's okay. I'm here to help." "Emma?" Relief flooded me. I rushed to the door and unlocked it, pulling it open. But the hallway was empty. Confusion mingled with dread. Had I imagined it? Was this some cruel trick? Suddenly, a cold hand grasped my shoulder from behind. I spun around, but no one was there. The power flickered back on, lights illuminating the empty room. The house was silent once more. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. I sank to the floor, the weight of the night's events overwhelming me. When the police arrived, they found no signs of forced entry, no evidence of an intruder. Detective Harris was among them, his skepticism evident. "Are you sure you weren't dreaming?" he asked gently. "I know what I heard and saw," I insisted, though even to my own ears it sounded implausible. He sighed. "We'll have a patrol car keep an eye on the area tonight. Get some rest." After they left, I sat in the living room, every creak of the house setting me on edge. A notification pinged on my phone, a new email. Opening it, I found a message with no sender address. "You're in over your head. Leave now or suffer the consequences." Attached was a photo of me sleeping, taken from inside my bedroom. Terror coursed through me. I needed to get out of this house. Grabbing a bag, I stuffed in essentials. As I reached for my car keys, I remembered they were missing, taken by the man in the dark coat. A knock at the door startled me. Peering through the peephole, I saw Emma again. "Thank goodness!" I exclaimed, opening the door. "I need your help." She stepped inside, her expression unreadable. "I know," she said softly. "I came to warn you." "Warn me about what?" "You're not safe here. None of us are." "Then help me leave. My car keys are gone." She shook her head slowly. "It's too late for that." Something in her tone sent a chill down my spine. "What do you mean?" She met my eyes, and for the first time, I noticed how eerily devoid of warmth they were. "He doesn't like it when people try to leave." I stepped back. "Emma, what's going on?" Her lips curled into a faint, unsettling smile. "You should have minded your own business." Realization dawned painfully. "It was you. You led him to me." She tilted her head. "In a manner of speaking, he requires assistance sometimes." I backed away, my mind racing for an escape route. "Why are you doing this?" "Some debts can't be paid easily," she replied cryptically. A shadow moved behind her, the man in the dark coat emerging from the hallway. Trapped, I clutched the candlestick tighter. "Stay away from me." He raised his hands placatingly. "No need for violence." He spoke for the first time, his voice smooth and cold. "We just want to talk." "About what?" I demanded. "About choices," he said, taking a step closer. "You can join us, or you can disappear like the others." "Join you?" Emma smiled again. "It's not so bad. You'll see." My thoughts flashed to the missing families, the haunted histories. "I won't be a part of this." He sighed. "A pity." Without warning, Emma lunged at me. I swung the candlestick, connecting with her shoulder. She stumbled back, but the man advanced swiftly. I dodged past him, racing toward the back door. Flinging it open, I sprinted into the night, the cold air biting my lungs. Behind me, their footsteps pursued, relentless. I headed toward the only place I thought might offer refuge, the vacant house at 212 Maple Street. Perhaps ironically, it was my best chance. Bursting through the overgrown yard, I found the back door unlocked. I slipped inside, locking it behind me. The house was dark and musty, shadows stretching ominously. I moved cautiously, searching for a place to hide. Footsteps echoed outside, accompanied by hushed voices. Desperate, I climbed the stairs to the second floor, finding a small attic hatch in the ceiling. Pulling it down, I scrambled up and pulled the ladder after me. In the cramped darkness of the attic, I held my breath, listening. The sound of the front door opening sent a spike of fear through me. They were inside. I heard their footsteps moving from room to room. "Come out! Come out! Wherever you are," Emma sang softly, her voice drifting up the stairs. I inched backward, my hand brushing against something cold and metallic. Turning, I realized it was an old trunk. Opening it quietly, I found it empty and climbed inside, pulling the lid over me. Minutes felt like hours as I waited, the air in the trunk growing stale. The attic hatch creaked open. I stifled a gasp, pressing myself against the trunk's interior. Footsteps padded softly across the attic floor. "I know you're here," the man's voice whispered. Silence stretched out, tension suffocating. Then the trunk lid was yanked open. I stared up into his expressionless face. "Found you," he said calmly. Before I could react, darkness enveloped me as everything went black. I awoke to the sound of distant voices and the beeping of medical equipment. Blinking against the harsh fluorescent light, I realized I was in a hospital room. A nurse noticed I was awake. "Welcome back," she said kindly. "You've had quite the ordeal." Confusion muddled my thoughts. "What happened?" "You were found unconscious in your home," she explained. "Your neighbor called 911 after hearing a commotion." "Emma?" I asked, my memories hazy. She checked her chart. "No, a Mr. Thompson from next door." "Did they catch them?" "The man and woman who attacked me." She gave me a sympathetic look. "There was no one else there when the police arrived." I struggled to make sense of it all. "But they were chasing me." I hid in the house across the street. She patted my hand gently. "You've been through a lot. Get some rest." After she left, Detective Harris entered the room. "Glad to see you're awake. Did you find them?" I asked urgently. He pulled up a chair. "We didn't find any evidence of intruders, but we did find something concerning." He held up a clear evidence bag containing my notebook. "This was found next to you. It's filled with entries about a man and woman stalking you, but our investigation suggests you might have been hallucinating." "What are you saying?" He sighed. "We believe you may have experienced a stress-induced episode. The house across the street has been boarded up for years. There's no way you were inside it." "No, that's not possible. I was there. They were real." He met my gaze firmly. "We've arranged for you to speak with a counselor. We want to help you get to the bottom of this." Frustration and disbelief overwhelmed me. Was it possible? Had it all been in my mind? As he stood to leave, he placed the notebook on the bedside table. "If you remember anything else, give me a call." Left alone, I picked up the notebook. Flipping through the pages, I noticed something odd. The handwriting wasn't mine. At the end of the last entry was a message. "You can't escape us. This is only the beginning." Terror seized me anew. Whether real or imagined, one thing was certain: the nightmare was far from over. The days following my hospital discharge were a blur of confusion and paranoia. I moved through them like a ghost, haunted by memories that no one else believed. The counselor assigned to me, Dr. Patel, was kind but skeptical. During our sessions, she encouraged me to differentiate between reality and illusion. Traumatic experiences can sometimes manifest as vivid hallucinations, she explained gently. Your mind might be trying to process stress by creating these scenarios. I wanted to believe her, to accept that perhaps my mind had fabricated the man in the dark coat and Emma's betrayal. But deep down, a nagging feeling told me that everything I experienced was real. Back at home, I found it difficult to resume normal life. The house felt tainted, every corner a reminder of that terrifying night. Sleep evaded me, and when it did come, it was plagued by nightmares. One afternoon, determined to reclaim my sense of normalcy, I decided to clean the house thoroughly. As I sorted through clutter, I came across the old photograph again. The one showing the man in the dark coat, unchanged since 1925. My heart skipped a beat. I had thought the police took it as evidence. Turning it over, I noticed new writing beneath the original date. "We always find you." A cold dread settled in. Was this another hallucination? I needed to be sure. I grabbed my coat and headed to the address listed for Emma on the neighborhood pamphlet she had given me. If she was real, perhaps I could confront her and get some answers. The address led me to a small cottage on the outskirts of town. The garden was overgrown, the windows dark. I knocked on the door, the sound echoing ominously. No response. "Emma?" I called out. Silence. A neighbor across the street was tending to his lawn. I approached him cautiously. "Excuse me, do you know if Emma is home?" He gave me a puzzled look. "No one named Emma lives there. That house has been empty for years." "But that's impossible. I spoke to her just days ago." He shook his head. "You must be mistaken. The last resident was Mrs. Whitaker, but she passed away a decade ago." I thanked him, confusion swirling in my mind. Was Emma another figment of my imagination? Determined to find the truth, I visited the town records office. A helpful clerk assisted me in searching for any records of an Emma living at the address. As we combed through the files, something caught my eye. A death certificate for an Emma Whitaker dated 1930. Her photograph was included. It was the woman I knew as Emma. I stumbled back, the room spinning. How could this be? She hadn't aged a day. "Are you all right?" the clerk asked, concern etched on his face. I think so," I managed to reply. "Could I get a copy of this?" "Of course." With the copy in hand, I left the office, my mind racing. If Emma was a ghost or something else entirely, what did that make the man in the dark coat? As I walked back home, a chilling thought occurred to me. What if I was being drawn into something far beyond my understanding? A cycle that had claimed others before me. I needed help. Real, tangible help. I decided to visit Dr. Patel outside of our scheduled sessions. Perhaps if I showed her the photograph and the death certificate, she would begin to believe me. At her office, I laid out everything on the table. "I know this sounds insane, but you have to believe me." She examined the documents carefully. "This is certainly unusual," she admitted. "But it could also be part of your mind trying to make sense of things." I clenched my fists in frustration. "Please, just consider that this might be real." She looked at me thoughtfully. "All right, let's assume for a moment that it is real. What do you think they want from you?" "I don't know," I confessed, "but I feel like I'm being drawn into something sinister." She nodded slowly. "Perhaps there's someone who can help. A colleague of mine who specializes in parapsychology. Would you be willing to speak with him?" Relief washed over me. "Yes, absolutely." She made a call, and later that day, I found myself sitting across from Dr. Marcus Reed, a tall man with sharp features and penetrating eyes. "I've been briefed on your situation," he began. "Tell me everything from the beginning." I recounted the events once more, watching his expression remain neutral yet attentive. When I finished, he leaned back. "What you're describing aligns with certain phenomena I've studied, instances where entities attach themselves to individuals, often those who are new to an area or vulnerable in some way. Entities, I echoed. He nodded. Spirits, energies, sometimes malevolent. They can be persistent. How do I get rid of them? There are rituals, cleansing ceremonies. But first, we need to verify their presence. He proposed visiting my home to conduct an investigation. Desperate for a solution, I agreed. That evening, Dr. Reed arrived at my house equipped with various instruments, EMF meters, thermal cameras, and other devices I didn't recognize. As he swept the house, the atmosphere grew heavy. There's definitely activity here, he noted, particularly strong in the living room. We moved to the living room where he set up a recorder. Sometimes, we can capture voices or sounds not audible to the human ear. We sat in silence for several minutes. Then, a faint whisper drifted through the room. It was indistinct but sent a shiver down my spine. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. He nodded, checking the recorder. "It's stronger than I anticipated." Suddenly, a loud thud echoed from upstairs. We both jumped. "Stay here," he instructed, heading toward the stairs. I wanted to protest but found myself rooted to the spot. Minutes passed, each one stretching longer than the last. Finally, unable to bear the silence, I called out, "Dr. Reed!" No response. I mustered my courage and followed his path upstairs. The hallway was dark, the only light coming from the open door of my bedroom. "Dr. Reed!" I called again, peering into the room. He stood facing the window, his back to me. "They're here," he said softly. A chill ran through me. "Who?" He turned slowly, his eyes now black voids. "They've been waiting for you." I stumbled back in horror. What's happening?" From behind me, a familiar voice whispered, "You should have left when you had the chance." I spun around to see Emma, her face pale and eyes hollow. The man in the dark coat loomed beside her. "This isn't real," I gasped. "It's all in my head." "Is it?" the man asked, his voice echoing unnaturally. I backed away, trapped between them. "What do you want from me?" "To join us," Emma replied, "just like we did." "I don't want any part of this." The man extended his hand. "You don't have a choice." Desperation took over. I bolted toward the stairs, but the hallway stretched endlessly, the exit eluding me. Their voices surrounded me, chanting in a language I didn't understand. The walls began to close in, darkness encroaching. "Let me go!" I screamed. A sudden jolt shook me, and I found myself lying on the floor of the living room, Dr. Reed kneeling beside me. "Are you okay?" he asked, his eyes normal once more. I looked around wildly. "Where are they?" "Who?" "Emma and the man. They were just here." He placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "You collapsed. You've been out for a few minutes." "No, I saw them. They were here." He helped me to a sitting position. Sometimes the mind projects fears in powerful ways, especially in environments with strong energies. I pulled away from him. "You don't believe me." "It's not about belief. It's about understanding what's happening to you." I stood up shakily. "I need to get out of here. Leaving won't solve the problem," he cautioned. "They may follow you. Then what am I supposed to do?" He considered me carefully. "There is one option, but it's risky." "Tell me." "A ritual to sever the connection, but it requires confronting them directly." I swallowed hard. "If it will make this stop, I'll do it." He began preparing the ritual, drawing symbols on the floor and lighting candles infused with herbs. He instructed me to sit in the center and handed me a talisman. "Whatever happens, do not leave the circle," he warned. I nodded, gripping the talisman tightly. He began chanting, the words foreign yet resonant. The air grew colder, and shadows deepened around us. From the darkness, figures emerged. Emma and the man, their forms flickering like distorted images. "You can't sever what's already bound," the man hissed. Dr. Reed's chanting intensified. Emma reached out, her hand passing through the barrier of the circle. "Come with us. It's peaceful on the other side." I closed my eyes, focusing on the talisman. "Don't listen to them," Dr. Reed shouted. "They're trying to weaken your resolve." A gale-force wind whipped around the room, extinguishing the candles. The symbols on the floor glowed faintly, the only light in the encroaching darkness. The man stepped closer. "This is your last chance." I met his gaze. "No, I choose to stay." A deafening roar filled the room as the shadows recoiled. The figures dissolved into wisps of smoke, which spiraled upward and vanished. Silence settled like a blanket. Dr. Reed lowered his arms, exhausted. "It's done." I exhaled shakily. "Is it over?" He nodded. "For now, they won't be able to reach you again." Relief flooded me, though tinged with residual fear. "Thank you." He gave a weary smile. "You've been through a lot. Rest now." Over the following weeks, the disturbances ceased. I resumed my life, slowly rebuilding a sense of normalcy. Dr. Reed checked in occasionally, offering support and guidance. One sunny morning, I received a letter with no return address. Hesitant, I opened it. Inside was the old photograph, now torn in half. Written on the back were the words, "Some doors can never be fully closed." A chill ran down my spine, but I took a deep breath. I had faced them before and prevailed. Whatever lingering shadows remained, I was no longer afraid. I burned the photograph, watching as the flames consumed the last remnants of that dark chapter. Life moved forward. I joined community groups, made new friends, and even started a garden. The house felt lighter, no longer a place of fear but a true home. One evening, as the sun set in hues of orange and pink, I sat on my porch sipping tea. A sense of peace washed over me. Across the street, a moving truck pulled up to the once vacant house. A family began unloading boxes, their laughter filling the air. I smiled, hopeful for them but also cautious. Rising from my seat, I decided to walk over and introduce myself. "Welcome to the neighborhood," I greeted warmly. "Thank you. We're the Johnsons," the father replied. As we chatted, their young daughter wandered toward the edge of the yard. She paused, waving at something behind me. "Who are you waving at, sweetie?" her mother asked. "The man in the dark coat," she replied innocently. "He says he used to live here." I felt a cold breeze at my back. "There's no one there," her mother said, chuckling. But I knew better. Kneeling down to the girl's level, I gently said, "If you ever feel scared or want to talk, I'm just across the street. Okay?" She nodded, her eyes reflecting a wisdom beyond her years. As I walked back home, I realized that while some battles are won, others continue in cycles. Perhaps all I could do was be there for those who might face what I did. That night, I left a light on by the window, a beacon of hope in the darkness.